This is the Troutbitten podcast.
Troutbitten.
Troutbitten?
Troutbitten.
Troutbitten.
Troutbitten?
Yeah, Troutbitten.
Troutbitten.
It's about trout.
Wild trout. This is Troutbitten.
This is the Troutbitten podcast, and thank you for tuning in. My name is Dominic Swentowski. I'm the owner of Troutbitten and the author of Troutbitten.com. All right, this is episode 4 of our Winter Skills series, and it's time to dig into nymphing strategies. With episode 1, we talked about where to find trout and what waters to fish. In episode 2, we got your hands cooking, and in last week's episode, we went through regulating your body heat, staying warm but not too warm, from head to toe, while also staying fishy.
Fishy.
So here we are, set to go headlong into one of our favorite tactics for winter trout. But first, let me introduce you to Austin Dando.
Hey, buddy.
It was 20 years ago today. Sergeant Pepper taught the band to play. I'm not going to keep that in there.
No, you should keep that in there.
So let me introduce to you the actor known for all these years.
You should repeat that at the outro about 4 times.
Maybe. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good, man.
You fished one of our favorite streams the other day. How'd that go?
I did. It was nice. I left the house before sunup, and my car read 28 degrees, and then probably 3 or 4 hours later, it was 50 degrees.
I know.
And we were talking about layering last week, and I had too many layers on by the time it hit 50.
Same.
I had to head back to the car and
I know.
ended up in a T-shirt and a jacket.
I know. It's not even a challenge right now. 50 degrees.
It's weird.
It was 48 today, 45, 48. Willie and I fished. Billy Dale.
3X Willie.
Yeah. And I started out with 3 layers. I took the outer layer off, rolled it up. About an hour later, I'm like, I still have too much on. I was down to that base layer. Oh, well. And Bill made fun of me because I kept the wool gloves on the whole time. I just hadn't thought about it.
You get used to them.
Yeah, man. They're good. Hey, now, nobody has mentioned this except me. Sometimes you, but all of these Winter Skills episodes have been longer, well, than I expected them to be. Right?
Yeah.
I might stop talking about it after this episode.
The previous one we just did hit an hour, which our idea for these is short, concise, within 30, 40 minutes tops.
Right.
And we're not quite hitting those times, but I think the conversation's been good, and there's not a whole lot of other resources diving into depth the certain topics we are about keeping hands warm and things. So it's a good time to do it. Might as well do it the best we can.
Yeah. In the summer, we did the dry dropper skills series, and I don't know, just like the tight line and Euro nymphing skills series, those topics that we chose for each week were very much more narrow than like, hey, how to dress for your head, shoulders, knees, and toes.
Yeah, it's different than how to recover slack.
Right.
What do you put on your whole body?
Yeah. Anyway, like I said, I haven't had any complaints, which is nice.
Yeah. No complaints. Always appreciated.
So do you like nymphing best, Austin? Is it your favorite tactic? I don't just mean in the winter, but just all the way around.
Overall?
Yeah. Tough answer, huh? You're thinking about it.
Well, there's certain things I like about it because it allows me the most consistency to put fish in the net.
Mm-hmm.
If I was going to have great nymphing action versus a great day of dry fly fishing, I'd choose the dry fly fishing.
Yeah, sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, well.
The reason I love to fish nymphs so much and so often is because it allows me to have the most consistent success regardless of time of year. So,
yeah.
You do it enough and you can get comfortable with it. It does become very fun. At first, maybe people can be frustrated with it, but yeah, it's definitely fun.
Right on. I like it best, I think, because it's the most challenging. You're under the water, and now you're trying to get dead drifts by staying pretty tight. That sounds weird. It's like you're trying to do a lot of conflicting things. You're trying to imagine where your nymph is. You're trying to imagine where it's going to go and help it get there,
Yeah, those challenges.
It is. It's fun. It's a fun challenge. And the way we like to do it best, usually on a tight line, or with a tight line system to control to the indie and all that kind of stuff. We have control over really every element of really what's going on underneath. It's the biggest puzzle to solve.
Yeah, and that's a great point. Like we've said before, anytime you go underwater, the mystery begins. And that's one aspect I also do enjoy, that kind of visual or mental visualization of what's going on down there and putting that puzzle together throughout the drift.
Yeah.
It's different than any sort of tactic.
Yeah, it really is. We both kind of seem to be in agreement too that it might be the most challenging. I've often told people that if you can be successful nymphing in the wintertime, then you got it.
Nice.
I think it's the most challenging in the winter, and we're about to talk about that, but it can also in some ways be easier in the winter, but your targets are narrower, your room for error I think is narrower, but if you can hit it, you can be really productive. There are more challenges in the winter that we're about to talk about. But yeah, if you want really good training for nymphing, go out in the wintertime.
Yeah, that's good. Everything has to be refined. That's for sure.
Nice. Good word. Hey, so all right, what is unique and different about nymphing in the winter? And really, that's kind of the theme of this whole podcast. Let's highlight a few things. So I'll say that we are not here tonight to teach you how to fish nymphs, right?
No.
I want to bring that up. We've already done multiple podcasts with the full crew of Troutbitten guys in other seasons about the many aspects of nymphing and the many styles of nymphing, and I'm sure we're going to do more. Also, Austin and I did a full 10-part skills series on the 9 essential skills for tight line and Euro nymphing. That was almost 1 year ago. It was 1 year ago.
Yeah.
And I'll say again, there are so many resources available for you to dig in and learn more about nymphing from the ground up, really. And all nymphing styles, dry flies to streamers and a whole lot more are on Troutbitten. And I'll leave many relevant links in the companion article for this podcast and in the show notes. The point is, I don't want anyone to get to the end of this podcast and feel like we left you hanging, And I said this last week, we don't try to cover big topics in small time frames. Instead, we like to break things down and build a bank of knowledge over time. And a lot of that stuff is on Troutbitten. It's already been built for you. So Austin and I want to discuss how we nymph in the winter and what's unique and different in the winter about nymphing. And sure, we're going to highlight our favorite rigs and methods, but we like to spend most of this time or focus the most on, again, what is unique in the winter, how we might change our approach, adjust our expectations of trout behavior, and then meet those trout with a fly that gives them something good to eat. Sound like a plan, Austin?
That sounds like a good plan to me, Dominic.
Let's start there. After we got the disclaimer out of the way that we're not going to try to cover everything. What's unique, man? What's different in the wintertime?
Yeah. There's a lot that is unique and different about the wintertime. Something that comes first to mind is less decisions, I think is a way to say it that we have to make. Right. What I mean by that is trout can be a little bit more predictable. They can kind of stay within similar patterns and lies day in and day out. And along with that, our fly selection is also a little easier.
Yeah.
We're not worried about what size mayfly or what color dubbing they're going to eat up on top.
Yeah.
Usually, there's somewhat less variables involved in the wintertime season that can help narrow our selections.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. Yeah. I will say, it doesn't mean it's easier to catch them in the wintertime.
Yeah, that's worth pointing out.
We talked about that a little bit in episode 1 of this season. We're saying that if you get it dialed in, you can really rack up numbers and sometimes size too. But I think overall it's harder in the wintertime, and my numbers go down a little bit. My catch rate, let's say, usually goes down on average. A little bit goes down.
Yeah.
I still catch all the trout I want to, Austin. Did you know that?
Well, if you only feel like it.
Right. Yeah, I have to want to catch
if you really wanted to.
If I wanted to. No, I do think the decisions are fewer. I do. I think there are fewer variables. Another thing is water type. They're quite often in the same water type as they were yesterday and the week before, and even sometimes the month before. And that is not, it is hardly ever anyway, the fastest water you can find.
Right on.
Quite often the whole lower and slower approach is a good one.
Yeah.
Do you agree that the colder the water, then usually the slower the water you're going to find the trout in?
As a general rule of thumb, yes, I agree with that.
Yeah. Good starting block.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're looking for just a guideline going out, that's a great thing to keep in mind. When I was out 2 days ago, we've had a decent amount of rain here, and the flows are up, but they're nice. And I was fishing some pretty deep water, but that deep water was also fast. And in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, wintertime, fish are down low.
Yeah.
And I was trying to get these short drifts through this deep piece of water, and it just wasn't working.
Yeah.
At least not with my tight line rig I had on hand. And I came to find myself fishing in slower, more shallow water. And I was catching fish much more readily. And what I kind of realized, at least for Saturday, was that slower kind of beat out lower for me. And I think in general, my winter fishing kind of also agrees with that. Cool. If I'm fishing fast water down low, I'm usually not really doing that well because it's harder to fish effectively. What you're looking for is some slow water that's also deep. So you got to slow the flies down, but you also have to be able to get down to those low fish. But I think overall for me, the slower the water, even if it's shallower, the better.
I understand that. I agree with that most times. When Bill and I fished today, he kind of started in, slower water like you're talking, and it was deeper too. He went downstream and started in that stuff. And I was like, well, I'm going to start up here in the riffles. And it was, let's say, knee deep and pocket water, just one pocket after another. In the soft piece of every pocket, and I was nymphing, that's why I bring this up. That's where I was finding fish. And right away, got a couple in that first pocket. A couple pockets later, there was another couple fish. And I caught them in patches for the next, couple hours. And then I kind of ran out of that water. And that river was higher, too, like you're talking about. We have healthy flows right now.
Right.
But the water's a great color, and that's what matters most. So I liked that. Even when Bill said, hey, let's go down here, I said, you go down there. I said, that's too deep for me to start in. I want to, I just wanted to be comfortable and moving around. I wanted to cover a bunch of water right away. I didn't want to stand in a deep spot and try to fight any water. I want to get my feet under me and get going. And I just love nymphing that kind of pocket water anyway. Right. Again, it was spread out. Yeah, just perfect for me. Love that stuff. And they are in there all year. But
right on.
Often they'll be in the fastest stuff. I'm saying like in the springtime or in the summertime, they'll be in the fastest part of that pocket water. If you break apart pocket water, you find fast pieces and slow pieces. And, every rock, there's kind of a slower stall just downstream of the rock. Really, that's where I was finding the trout. Not necessarily a foot or two beyond that rock, but a little further down, 5 or 6 feet back. Nice. That water is still slower. Man, when I targeted it and, I got a good drift and a lucky fish, it's pretty good. It isn't always like that. Not every day are they in that kind of water. Often they're down in the water that Bill started in. Later on in the day, Bill had the best success with streamers and a tail out,
Yep. It's not every day you get to catch 3 fish.
And then another 3 fish. And then another 3 fish.
Let's not get carried away.
No, but I tried nymphing that tail out too. I tried the nymphing the first tail out that was above where I was just talking about. And I picked up one there and missed another. But I couldn't really get the nymphing going. And Bill and I were talking about this, that often nymphing is harder in a tail out than streamer fishing is. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Do you think it's because they have a better chance at observing your fly and getting that thing to look natural than, a streamer pattern can kind of kick and move on its own and it still look fairly normal to a fish?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to it. They could see us better too.
Yeah.
They could see us easier. Get spooked more. I think they're ultra spooky sometimes in tail outs. Well, not in the water quality that we had today, but they can be. I think streamer presentations just look great in a tail out. At night, we do the same thing and we'll be swinging stuff through those tail outs. Good stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway, so let's move on to this concept. I think this is fair to say. Trout will not move as far to eat in the wintertime. Their metabolism is lower. I guess that makes them seem more picky or more difficult, but I just think you have to get it right in their lane and get a perfect drift. And if you get that, then I don't find them to be all that picky. But again, the target is just narrower.
Yeah. So when we talk about wintertime nymphing, everything that we've talked about nymphing in general on the podcast still applies. But when we go to wintertime, it's zeroed in, it's dialed in, and there's a lot less forgiveness there from the trout than you may find, let's say, mid-May when they're eating like crazy and in the fast stuff and in the slow stuff all over.
Yeah.
You really do have to get their feeding patterns and behavioral patterns figured out and repeat that. But once you do, like you said, it can be quite good.
Yeah, you got to find the water type that they're in. But often when you find it, you're going to find a lot of fish in that water type. And then you got to find a pattern, but that can be pretty predictable. We'll talk about that. But then you have to get that, I'm saying perfect dead drift. That's what we're always aiming for anyway. But man, because, and I think that pickiness, again, comes down to the fact that they're not going to move as far. If they normally, let's say they'll move a foot to the left or a foot up or a foot to the right, I'm just rounding it off, whatever.
Yeah.
If we can maybe normally expect them to move 12 inches, now I think they move 6 inches or just 4 inches. Sometimes you got to hit them right on the nose, it seems.
Yeah, and our waters are so packed full of food that, they don't have to move a lot all day long to get food brought to them. I fished some tailwaters and some other rivers down south and out west that the density of food is not nearly as high, and those fish will move because they have to. But at least in our region of central Pennsylvania, that's not the case. They can stay put.
That's a great point. And another time that they will move, and again, they were doing it today, is for streamers.
Sure.
You get the right water type and the willing fish, something we might call a streamer bite. Yeah, they'll move. They'll move further than a foot. Definitely more than 4 inches. Bigger food form, going to move further. We'll talk about streamers a lot more next week. So trout group up more in the winter. I think that's fair to say. And the colder the water, I think the more that is true.
Yeah, I agree with that. In some ways, winter is harder overall, but if you do recognize that and dial it all in, winter nymphing can sometimes even be easier than other seasons because the less variables, less selections, choices, it makes us more focused when we're on the water.
Yeah, and because of that challenge, like I stick with it. And I did that today. I didn't fish streamers at all. And I saw Bill up there, up above me. Eventually, he switched to streamers, and I saw him catching a couple fish, and I was almost tempted to do it. But I was having fun on nymphs. And often I'll stick with nymphs all day because I know they're going to work. If they're going to eat, they're going to eat nymphs if they're hungry, right? Because I know what they should eat too because of the pattern selection, because those other options for, once you figure it out, then those other options for where they're going to sit and what they're going to eat are kind of, limited. Like you said, the variables are narrower.
Yeah.
And I just think it's good for my focus. I enjoy that challenge to like really focus on the tight targets and one specific thing.
That's great stuff.
I enjoy it. Tactical Fly Fisher was founded by Fly Fishing Team USA angler Devin Olson to bring anglers cutting-edge gear and techniques from the international competitive fly fishing scene. Tactical Fly Fisher's aim is to help you improve your angling ability so you can have more fun on the water. Whether you need some flies, fly tying equipment, or a new rod or reel, they've got you covered. Head on over to tacticalflyfisher.com and use the code TBPOD10, that's TBPOD10, to get 10% off flies, fly tying supplies, or terminal tackle. For over a decade, Smith Creek has provided innovative, high-quality fly fishing accessories designed to put your gear in easy reach, free up your hands, and keep our waters clean. For 2023, check out the all-new patented tippet holder. Each unit is individually machined from billet aluminum and anodized in 2 eye-catching colors. They hold up to 5 tippet spools with a spring-loaded plunger that is quick and easy to use, keeping your tippet spools right where you need them. Also, the brand new Rod Clip Plus comes with an improved 304 steel pin, plus a carabiner clip, giving you 2 ways to attach it. All Smith Creek products are built guide tough and backed by solid customer service. To learn more about Smith Creek products, visit their website at smithcreek.co. So before we jump into our favorite nymph rigs and tactics, allow me to point this out. However you can get the necessary drift, go for it. If you use a fly line and an indie rig and you're a deadly accurate caster with great mending, like that's fantastic. Do that. When I need extra distance, I might choose that rig. If I'm in long pools or situations with an even riverbed, not too many chunky rocks getting in my way, I might do that. And if you like Euro nymphing with a single small fly that incorporates a tungsten bead for the weight, and maybe you have a real talent for presenting that very naturally on a micro mono rig, then do that. The message from me is we're not here to tell you to fish our way. And I say this all the time. It's not the tools or the rig that creates success. It's how you fish it, right?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. I'm always very careful to tell anyone they should do something or have to do something the way that I do it. My goal or my message, I guess, as you said, is to really just explain the benefits or tactics of the way that I enjoy doing something and that work for me, and then just let the angler make the decision on their own. If they choose to go ahead and incorporate those things and find success, great. If they don't, that's fine. whoever has the most fun wins at the end of the day.
I like that, yeah.
But in the same breath, we should also be pretty honest with ourselves.
Yeah.
And with our outcomes. And what I mean is if we're not putting fish in the net with any kind of consistency or regularity, then we need to ask a few questions.
Yeah, good point.
Things like, are our flies drifting in one seam? Is our casting being accurate? Are we recovering slack effectively? All these things, right?
Yeah.
And as I said before, all the same nymphing principles apply, but in the wintertime, the trout can be much less forgiving.
Oh, yeah.
So we got to dial that stuff in.
Yeah. And so you use whatever rig you want to use, but then you got to be good with it. And like you said, if it's not working, you change something. And maybe you got to admit to yourself, maybe this rig isn't the best. Maybe my dad showed me this rig, but maybe it's time, if I really want to catch fish, to move on from that rig, or just change it maybe a little bit. And you and I are always changing things, right?
Exactly. Don't feel bound by anything or any constraint, and don't feel bad by moving on from something if you've been doing it a while.
Yeah. Always changing things, looking for the next advantage, the next edge. And I always say, test without bias, right? All right, so lots of stuff there to think about. And there are many rigs that will get the job done. Water type dictates a lot of style and rig choices, but there's a reason, too, that we choose the rigs we do. Almost regardless of the size of the river or the water conditions, we use the rigs we do. Because some tools just lend themselves to great presentations with many, many options, which I like.
Yeah, I like that too.
Yeah. So one thing I think about a lot in the wintertime is tight targets. Again, those fish aren't going to move very far, and I just have to get it right on top of them in the right way, a great dead drift. And the only way for me to do that is I'm going to say, it needs to be one lane. I'm thinking 6-inch lanes.
Yeah, man.
Right? And then I'll move over 6 inches or a foot, or maybe I'm skipping some of it, but I call it tight targets. I know what seam I'm in. I'm not just throwing it into an area, or I mentioned that nice slow water behind a rock. Well, I'm either on the left edge of that or the right edge of that. I call them merger seams. I know where I put it in, the nymph, if I'm casting upstream. I know where I put the nymph in, and now I know where it should come out. And if it doesn't, I go, I got that one wrong. Better repeat it. Better give that trout another chance. Tight targets, and I say too, believe in every cast. I kind of keep preaching that to myself as I'm fishing, especially when the going gets tough.
Yeah.
That's one of the things I keep telling myself. It's you got to believe if you're casting, if you've chosen an area to cast into and you're making a cast, then you have to believe. You just got to believe that there's a fish coming, that you're going to catch a fish, or don't make the cast. Go find a piece of water that you have confidence that you're going to catch a fish out of. And then make it happen. 100% believe I'm going to make it happen. And usually you don't. That's fishing. But then, that's it. Tight targets and believe in it.
That really resonates with me in the wintertime as well. Going back again to this weekend, we have that higher flow. I found myself wanting to keep reaching out and wading out into the harder, faster stuff.
Yeah.
And each time I did that, the performance of my drift and the amount of fish I would catch would go down. And, I realized pretty quickly that I was sort of wasting time. And I had to talk myself into staying back, fishing to a really tight target, making sure those flies landed one seam and came out in one seam.
Right on.
And just saying, okay, the drift starts here and the drift stops here. And that's all I'm going to try to get done.
Yeah.
And that really is a big help.
This goes back to what we said earlier. That's why winter is even more challenging. It forces you to do what we're talking about.
Yeah.
That's why we're bringing it up. There's a mental discipline there too. And I don't know, some mental strength, right?
It is.
Some confidence to stick it out. You might not catch anything for 2 hours, but if you stick it out, you're probably going to.
What we're saying is it's a grind.
That's all it is. It's a grind. One grind after the other.
Grind after the other.
All right, so let's dig into our favorite rigs, Austin. What's your favorite? Let's go. Come on.
Yeah. So favorite rig is the mono rig. Tight line to the nymphs.
Yeah.
Do you want to touch on what the leader formula looks like for a mono rig? Or we think we got that pretty well
I'll tell
covered?
you what. Right. I'm going to tell you what. I'm going to remind everybody that we've talked about the Troutbitten mono rig. We've talked about the standard mono rig, and sometimes we fish a thinner mono rig and even a micro mono rig. Great stuff. I was fishing a micro yesterday. But yeah, I'm fishing our standard mono rig way more often than not. not just for the versatility, but because I actually get the best drifts on a pure tight line to one nymph, if that's what I'm fishing.
Cool.
And so we have your leader build. Now, again, you can go to Troutbitten, find that Troutbitten standard mono rig. And, you could look up Euro nymphing rigs. And it's pretty similar.
Yeah.
But what's beyond the sighter then is the tippet and the nymphs. And sometimes there's some split shot. But let's talk about the configuration of those nymphs, Austin. I think that's honestly what's most important. That sighter, if we're tight lining, the sighter's going to stay up and out of the water. We did a video not too long ago, Josh and I did, about everything you can read on the sighter. Well, you have to keep the sighter off of the water. In this case, that's your baseline. That's what we're talking about. The sighter's up out of the water, so's the leader. That's what makes you tight then to what's under the water. And that's how we know what's going on. Okay, there's your basic overview of tight line nymphing. But what we're talking about is maybe what is a little different, or how we adapt what is under the water. The configuration then of those nymphs, and sometimes split shot, but how are you building your rig after the sighter, Austin?
Sure. Yeah, so right off the end of the sighter, I'll have a tippet ring. And for my tippet section, I generally come off the tippet ring with a short, maybe 1 to 2 feet of 4X.
Okay.
And off of that, I taper down to normally 5 to my terminal fly. What I like about the 4X above, we've talked about this before, but especially in the wintertime where we're looking for occasional bobber drifts and Dorsey drifts, things like that, I like to mount my suspension device on the 4X. Especially when using a Dorsey yarn indicator, it slides much better on the bit thicker diameters, so I like that.
I like it.
But coming down off that 5X, I may have 3 feet after that.
Yeah.
And then I'll tie in a tag, usually let's say 12 to 16 inches above the very bottom fly. Yeah. We ride those a little bit closer in the wintertime.
Right. That's
because
one
of
of
the theory that, this stuff is a little less spread out. So we put them closer together.
Yeah. So you're 12 to 16 inches instead of, 18 to 20 to 24 inches.
Exactly.
Apart.
Yep.
On the nymphs.
Yeah. In the spring, I may be that far apart instead.
Right on. Yeah, so that's my go-to rig as well. And I will say to everybody out there, the distances, that's up to you. That's up to you and your water, and even what angles you like to fish at. We can't help you decide that. Austin said he likes to go 2 feet and then 3 feet. So he has what? It sounds like 5 feet to the point fly.
Yeah.
Let me make this point. I like my point fly to be the heaviest fly. That doesn't mean it's what you might call an anchor fly. That doesn't mean it's really, really heavy. Not at all. Not at all. It could just be a 3 millimeter bead. Okay. Or it could just be a number 6 split shot, whatever the case may be for the weight. Talk about that in a minute. The heaviest thing I want at the end of my line, right?
Yeah.
So my heaviest fly then is at the end of the line. So this tag fly that we're talking about, that I'm with you, Austin, 12 inches, 14 inches, maybe 16 inches up, almost maximum for me in the wintertime. Unless it's a weird day and I'm trying different things, I'll ride it a little higher. Anyway, that keeps both nymphs very low. And the tag fly, though, is lighter. For me, I like it to be lighter and smaller than that point fly.
Yep. Would you want to expand on why you like that point fly to be the heaviest one in the rig?
Well, I always say you're most in touch with the heaviest thing on your line. And that's because it's true. Let's say that I have a number 12 stone fly at the end, and it weighs a lot more than my number 16 blue collar worker up top. And so I get to go through the blue collar worker, or let's say right past it. It's on a tag that's 4 inches long. I get to go right past that blue collar worker, really be in touch with it, but be most in touch and in control with also the thing that is down in the strike zone most deliberately and very close to the riverbed. So I have excellent control over and strike detection over the whole system. You absolutely can reverse those flies. Try it. See if it works for you. That'll get both flies. If you see what I'm saying? You put the stonefly then up on the tag in the blue collar worker down low. Well, okay, both flies are going to ride very low then in that strike zone, let's call it. And sometimes I'll do that. We'll talk about that in a minute. I'll ride a trailer instead of a tag system then. But it doesn't have to be just nymphs either. And I guess we've talked about this, but people use split shot way too little, I think, these days. Everybody's, weighted nymphs. Yeah. We've been through it a little bit before, and I've written full articles about it. I won't try to convince you of it here, but if you haven't thought about it yet, just open your mind to the fact that an unweighted nymph may very well drift better than a weighted nymph. It may look more natural, let's say. And you can use split shot, I'm going to say 5 inches, round that off, 5 inches above that unweighted fly, for me, often it's an egg, and that egg just looks so more natural because it has the freedom to kind of be neutrally buoyant and moving, let's say within a 5-inch radius of that split shot. Now, what am I in touch with most? It's that split shot. Maybe it's a number one split shot that weighs 30 centigrams, and I'm in touch with that. And fair enough, I lose a little bit of strike detection to the egg, but again, the upside is it can look very natural. That's really the primary way that I rig, is with it, what we just described, with that egg on the very point, and then the split shot 5 inches up from that. I don't want it any further because I don't want to be too far out of touch, and lose strike detection. And anyway, then that blue collar worker or something smaller, like a 14 or a 16, maybe an 18 or even a 20 up top, and whatever, 16 inches up, 14 inches up, something like that. I do like to kind of fish 2 zones that way.
Yeah. And 2 zones is a key, I think.
Yeah, today they ate at least a third of my fish, ate the tag up above. It was a number 16 bead on a hook fly. You ever fished that, Austin?
Oh, sure. But, we have many names for things that are beads on hooks.
No.
No. Tell us about your bead on a hook fly.
Real quick, I have an article coming out about that too. It's just a bead on a hook. I've been curious, we're getting to the extreme now where people will put a very big bead and just a little bit of material behind it and say, there's my blue-winged olive, or whatever the case, or here's a Waltz worm. And I'm like, there's no dubbing on there. It's like 60, 70% of what is there is a bead. Anyway, we've talked about it. And when it gets to be that extreme, I don't think it matters what's behind the bead. So I've been testing it. And I swear to you, about 5 or 6 fish today ate the bead on a hook fly.
Not surprising.
Nothing but a bead on a hook, thread to hold it on.
Yeah.
Anyway, the real point there is that they ate the tag fly up above. I don't care what it was. It could have been a blue collar worker. It could have been a pheasant tail. Probably could have been a Waltz, whatever. The point is they ate that position. They ate it up above. And in that, again, faster water, not fast, but the slow pockets within the mixed water. And if I hadn't had that rig on, I think there's 5 or 6 fish less that I would have caught.
Nice. Yeah, and especially like you said, the angles and sometimes the positioning that we are in will dictate that spacing and where those flies end up in the column. So it is good to experiment with all of that. Yeah.
So we're talking here about what I call a pure tight line rig. There's nothing in between you and the flies. All right. And when we do this, you need to move around a lot, to hold that, to get that angle, that correct angle, so that you're not crossing seams. And like Austin said earlier, everything has to be in one seam. Start in one seam, finish in one seam. I'll tell you one of the biggest mistakes that I see out there is people crossing seams. They'll cast 45 degrees up and expect to drift 45 degrees down. At no point is that actually dead drifting. If your tippet is crossing seams, you're just not going to dead drift. It is always going to track towards your rod tip. I don't care if you're using 9X. Do they make that?
They do make that.
Well, I don't care if you're using 10X. Do they make that? Anyway.
Probably somewhere in France.
Probably. At some point it doesn't exist. Meaning like it disappears.
You just throw the flies in there and they're gone.
Well, that's what everybody wishes for. They think that's how you'd get a dead drift. But I don't think that's true. Anyway, we'll go through that some other day. If you have any weight built into the fly, if it wasn't attached to the tippet, it'd be down there in 2 seconds.
Yeah.
Average. Yep. Anyway, you have to do something to bring those flies through the current. You have to help it a little bit. And because it's in touch with your rod tip, even on 10X, if you're casting across seams, you're not going to get a true dead drift. Anyway, we're trying to get a true dead drift on a tight line. You just have to wait a lot. That's not always possible. Like you said, Austin, a lot of our waters have been up, and well, they are. They're up, and they're much of it is not wadeable.
No,
and so go ahead.
You have to be very intentional about where you position yourself in the river, and very intentional about what you set yourself up for. So again, like me, I had the tendency 2 days ago to want to reach and go to that far looking best to deep water. But in reality, it was far and deep, but it was also really fast. And I was crossing over all the really good stuff on the way there. Well, so you have to dial it back some days.
All right, so if you wanted to get that stuff on the other side, maybe there's a piece of water over there you can't wade to. Yep. And there's fish over there. What are you doing?
So that's where the tight line to the indicator comes in.
Sure.
We could fish that either with a plastic bobber, thingamabobber style, or a Dorsey yarn indicator.
Yeah. Airlock.
Yep. Airlock as well. It's the same leader, same flies, same setup.
Yeah.
It's got that same tippet section I was just talking about, but now I will mount that Indy to the 4X, and I'll cast that into that far lane, and the same principle applies. I will try to do a casting stroke and maybe an aerial mend if I have to across the creek to land those flies and that indicator in one seam. And it's important that that indicator lands in the same seam as well. That applies to the crossing just as much as the two nymphs do.
It does. What you just said is what people miss the most. And I'll get lazy about it and I'll miss it the most. Everything needs to land in one seam. And then you try, well, we're on this tight line to the Indy approach. So the fly lands and then the Indy lands in the exact same seam behind it. And then ideally, nothing else hits the water. And that's it.
Yeah.
Now, we did a full podcast on this method. And man, I have at least a dozen articles on this method. But Austin, how do we use this differently in the winter? How's it different in the winter than, I don't know, other times of the year?
Yeah. An advantage I like about it is that it allows me to slow things down with a little bit more control in the wintertime. So wintertime is a little bit unique in that we're looking for some days like the slowest drifts we can get, crawling those flies just off the bottom. So we can do things like fish heavily weighted flies or fish just split shot and keep adjusting that weight underneath an indicator rig.
Sure.
And get that thing to slow down and lock into position and get really good, fairly long drifts that are as drag-free as they could be. That's really hard to do on a tight line for any sort of distance. And when we have that indicator up above, it can sort of lock the amount of distance those flies travel underneath. So they're not going up and down by the rod tip any more than they would be just by the current of the surface of the water. So it provides a very controlled drift throughout and very consistent presentation.
That's a good explanation. Whether it's after a fishing trip or at a backyard fire, you can bet the Troutbitten crew has a case of New Trail Broken Heels along with us. It's honestly our favorite beer. This hazy IPA is smooth and full-bodied. Hand-selected citra hops lead to notes of bright clementine and juicy ruby red grapefruit. Broken Heels is a keeper. New Trail beer is proudly brewed in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, and delivered cold to your favorite craft beer retailer every week. At New Trail, it's not about being the best angler. It's about getting out there. So enjoy nature's moments and reward yourself for a day well fished with New Trail Broken Heels. It's Troutbitten's favorite beer. Precision Fly and Tackle is a family-owned business with a passion for the outdoors and a sense of adventure. They are anglers who enjoy every moment spent on the water with family and friends. Precision Fly and Tackle carries the widest selection of Euro rods, reels, lines, leaders, flies, and accessories. From the beginner to the advanced angler, Precision Fly and Tackle can outfit every angler, no matter the budget. Visit them online at precisionflyandtackle.com. Then use code TROUTBITTEN10, that's the number 10, for 10% off your order. Gear up with Precision Fly and Tackle for your next adventure. I'd say the thing I do differently the most in the winter is I will adjust more because I get stubborn, because I think the fish do, about where my bottom fly needs to be, whether that, it doesn't matter. It's an egg a lot of times for me, an egg pattern. It could be a stone fly, waltz worm, whatever is down there on the bottom. I need it to be really close. And so I'm more willing in the winter time to tick that bottom. Normally, let's say it's May or June, the fish are, whatever, we acknowledge, they're more active, they're more willing, especially in the slower water where we're fishing these indies, they're more willing to look up and go, I'll go up there 18, 20 inches, 2 feet, hell, 3 feet, I'll go get that.
Good point.
You know, and in the wintertime, I just don't find them all that willing. So in May and June, I may set my indie rigs so that I don't even touch all the way down through. And I will fish 45 to 45, like we just said we don't do on a pure tight line system.
Yeah.
I'm putting that indie on so that I can get those long drifts. And in May and June, I'm saying that my drifts might be really long, all the way from 45 to 45, and sometimes even a little further. And, you know, they eat right before you pick up. But the whole way down through, maybe I only touched or ticked the bottom a little bit, like once. I find if I try to duplicate that or do that in, right now in January, I just don't catch very many fish most days. All this is general.
Yeah.
I just got to get lower. I have to be willing to tick and tick, maybe a few times, 4 or 5 times throughout the drift. And yeah, what you're doing at that point too is hoping it doesn't stick.
Yep.
So I'm saying too, I am more willing, I don't like it, but I'm more willing to get hung up. And a lot of those areas are deeper and you can't get your flies back, so you have to break off. And I'm tying more knots. Now, we don't like doing that in the wintertime, but it's just something for me in these areas that we're talking about, especially that we'll fish the Indy. I just surrender to it. I go, well, I found a patch of fish. I'm catching fish, but I'm also hitting the bottom and touching and sometimes snagging up.
Right. And I think that is especially crucial in things like bobber holes, which we might be able to expand on. What I mean by a bobber hole is just a big, long hole that comes out from a tail out. Or
that's what Sloop used to call it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Sloop used to say, that's a bobber hole.
Exactly. Hey, Slooper.
Slooper.
But on those situations, it is even more crucial, I think, to slow down and sometimes overweight, because we can drift through those areas pretty fast sometimes.
Yeah. And
never even get in touch with the fly or the bobber.
Yeah.
And the drift be over. And really, we're not getting down to the fish's level. So when we're able to overweight or slow down the flies and actually get that tippet section to straighten out and get to the bottom and slow motion move through it, that's what's going to give us our best success.
Yeah.
If you're just flying through on the bobber in deep water and you're never actually feeling the payload of the flies, it's not what you're looking for.
Same. I mean, I fully agree with that. Yep. And we're calling them bobber holes. Like, we don't care about the word bobber. We just, that's what it is.
Yeah.
But we also use a Dorsey yarn indicator. You mentioned that. You could use a New Zealand yarn indicator. It's very similar. Yarn, the two that we just mentioned anyway, is almost a completely different tactic than what the bobber can do.
Nice.
It just is. It just drifts differently. Even if you're with a fly line and a 9-foot leader and you're mending, that yarn just drifts differently and it shows you different things than what a bobber can do. Now, but the bobber has its own strengths. And I'll use the bobber for distance and for heavier water and for suspending more weight and all that. And especially if I plan on fishing all the way down past my position to that 45 up and then now all the way down to 45 degrees down, the bobber holds its seam more. And the yarn is so nimble, really, that it wants to kind of drift across toward your rod tip or toward the line if you have that on the water.
Yeah.
Whereas the bobber just kind of suctions to the water. However, that's also what makes the bobber less sensitive, because it's suctioned down into the water.
Right.
They are very different tools.
That's absolutely true. Like I was fishing one this weekend, a Dorsey, in some shallower water where when I want to land that, maybe at a distance, let's say, that I want to cast a bobber, but it's shallower water, maybe spookier trout. I don't want to make a big splash or big commotion upon the entry of those flies.
Yeah.
I'll throw on the Dorsey and toss those up, and it lands like softer than a dry fly almost.
Oh, yeah.
That's nothing.
Yeah, a dry fly spooks them more than a Dorsey. That's the truth. It really does.
So I love it for all those different advantages, both of them.
Agreed. So we just talked about the mono rig and a pure tight line system. You call it a Euro nymphing rig if that's what you're doing. And then we talked about putting an indicator on that tight line rig. And we have all kinds of advantages and reasons we'd rather do that than, let's say, again, casting a fly line with a 9-foot leader or even a right angle rig or something like that. However, especially when I fish from a boat this time of year, I kind of enjoy throwing that, almost your traditional rig. I will say, if you're going to throw, a fly line and a 9-foot or even a 6-foot leader or something like that, more traditional, and you got your Indy on there, try that everything under the Indy is one diameter, just 5X perhaps. 4X, maybe 5X. Maybe mount the Indy on the 4X like Austin does, but then just 5X after that. You'll have more success if you have, less drag under there and less complicated. You don't want to taper under the water. So when I do use a fly line and a standard leader at this time of the year, that's how I do it. And I can get some really good drifts. You do have to be good at mending. You have to choose your water, the water that suits your rig. You just have to be very honest about, are you getting a true dead drift? Like Austin said earlier, you're starting in one seam. When you pull that fly out, where does it come from? Same seam? Okay. And when you were watching your indicator, did it slow down or was it just ripping surface current speed downstream the whole time. You know, if it slowed down, then you have a good chance that even if you didn't touch the bottom, you still got in the strike zone, some current anyway, that was going slower. That's what
Good
made
stuff.
your Indy go slower. So, like I said earlier, you can do all the things we just talked about on whatever rig you're most comfortable with. Well, whatever rig you're good at, right? You might be really comfortable with a bad rig. We can't do anything about that.
But to you, it's good.
But to you, it's good.
Yeah.
Anyway, there are no bad rigs. There are just bad fishermen. That's not true. There are bad rigs, right?
There's definitely good and bad in the world.
Austin, I could give you a rig that you couldn't catch fish on tomorrow.
I believe you.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I could give you a fly you wouldn't catch a fish on
Exactly.
either.
I say that about flies too. People will tell you pattern doesn't matter. I'm like, I bet I could give you something that wouldn't catch a fish.
Yeah. It's true.
Right? You take anything to its extreme, and that's the real test. So there are a lot of Troutbitten articles on all the rigging and the tight line styles that we just talked about. Again, we don't want to leave you hanging, you know, and we're not. We're not trying to cover a whole lot here, but I hope we, pointed out some of the key differences and highlighted some of the, I think, the fun things about nymphing in the wintertime. What would we miss, Austin? Anything else?
I'll just touch on pattern a little bit.
Yeah. I tend to ignore that, right? We're like, flies.
Sure.
Fish flies.
And that's pretty much what I'll say is fish flies. But what you'll hear most and read most about is the necessity for smaller and smaller is better.
Right.
Trout are really weary. They won't go after much of any decent size in the wintertime. But don't be hesitant to reach into your box if you have 14 pheasant tails, if you have size 12 or 10 or 8 size rubber legs or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Don't hesitate to fish those patterns.
Right.
Because those size bugs are still in the system, at least in our rivers.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is just experiment and don't feel constrained or held back by what flies you have in your box and that maybe you can't go out in the wintertime or you don't have a chance to do well.
Oh, for sure.
Fish those small patterns too, but don't overlook the regular sized or even big sized stuff you'd fish other times of the year.
Yeah. I keep hearing people tell you over and over, the more anglers there are, the smaller those flies we have to keep fishing. Everything keeps getting smaller. Those fish keep getting pickier.
I've heard that too.
I just don't find it to be true. And yet there are some days where absolutely I got to fish an 18 or a 20. And I'm ready to do that. I will say, I promised I was going to bring this up. One of my favorite ways to fish a 20 or a 22 or maybe a 24, I suppose. I don't have anything smaller than that, that's for sure, is to trail it behind something bigger. We've talked about that. We call it the bait and switch. For me, it's often an egg in the wintertime, and then in behind that egg, maybe only 12 inches, maybe 12, 14 inches, trailing behind that bigger fly, more prominent fly. We talked about color in episode 1. That colorful, attractive fly, that's where I'll put that real small one. That's what works for me. That's what I have the most confidence in when I'm fishing real small. I don't have a whole lot of confidence just, fishing 2 number 22 zebra midges.
Yeah.
And I've done it. And I did it, maybe 2 weeks ago. I promised myself I was going to fish 2 really small flies all morning. I caught a couple fish, and right. I got them down in different ways with split shot, with tungsten beads and whatnot. It was one morning, but it's not the only morning I've ever done it.
Sure.
I do a lot better when I pair it up with something that's going to get their attention. And then you seal the deal, the bait and switch concept, with that real small, perhaps natural thing, more natural thing.
How many takes do you think you miss due to contact or lessened contact from that small trailer back there?
Not many. That's a very good question. And that's the first thing that I thought about when I started fishing that kind of rig.
Yeah.
And as people get into nymphing these days, I think a lot of people, the gateway really is tight line nymphing. And you learn all these principles with I got to be in touch with my fly. That strike detection is everything. I mostly agree with that. We talked about the egg, though, and I really believe that being out of touch with that egg pattern does better for me. Yeah. And with these really, really small nymphs, 20s and 22s, sometimes even the 18s, I do better by being slightly out of touch with them. And so I'll grant you, Austin, I probably miss more trout than I would. I probably miss a few trout. That they're on that 12-inch leash, behind the egg, let's say. Well, they might eat it, and I might not ever know it.
Yeah.
Because what I'm really in touch with, that egg, it didn't move.
Yeah.
Or the stonefly, or whatever, that didn't move. But I think a lot of times they wouldn't have eaten it, if I was purely in touch with it. It's such a tiny thing. It's such a tiny food form that I feel like being in touch with it alters it too much. That's my theory on it.
I see that. How do you attach that when you trail it? What's your preferred method?
I suppose come right back out of the eye of the first fly.
Okay, so if you're fishing that egg, you'd come out of the eye of the egg and go back 12 inches or so.
Yes, but if I was fishing a Pat's rubber legs, for example, I'd probably come off of the bend, and I've learned that the hard way.
Okay.
If I come off of the eye of a Pat's rubber legs, back out of the eye, then the trailing line tends to kind of get tangled with some of those legs, for example.
Okay, yeah.
Some of the material of the fly matters. Now, you do that rig a fair amount, the bait and switch, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Do you tag them? You could put that egg on a tag and then, run the zebra midge on a 12-inch, main line back.
No, usually I do the similar trailer as you're saying, because I'm set up sort of on that tandem rig as
right.
a standard go-to, and then I'll just add on to it. So I'm generally not building the rig to accommodate that.
Right. And I have put it, just like you, I've kind of tried everything, and I've tried putting it on a tag. Let's say it's a zebra midge back there.
Yep.
It doesn't track as well. It could be 4 inches off of the same track, let's say, as its parent fly. I don't know. Does 4 inches matter? It might, because one of the first things we said is trout aren't going to move much more than 4 or 6 inches.
Right on.
So those kinds of things, I think, those little things add up. But that's a fun adjustment to our main few rigs that we talked about. And by the way, I'll run that on a pure tight line, which was our kind of primary favorite rig in the winter, or I'll run it on the tight line to the indicator.
Yeah.
I don't care. The only thing I change is throw the Indy on.
And those changes gives us hope and renewed confidence and renewed reasons to make the next cast on those winter's days when things are slow and things are tough. So it's good to have all that stuff in your back pocket to try.
Yeah. That's nice. So we're here at story time. Are you ready? You have a story?
Yeah, I think I have one.
Mm-hmm.
A few years ago when I was living in North Carolina, I was
not
on
cold down there.
Yeah, it's usually not that cold. It's funny when we get snow down there, everybody loses their mind and they don't know how to drive. It was entertaining. But I was on a camping / fishing trip with my friend Ben out in the Black Mountain area. And there's some really nice smaller trout streams that flow through that mountain. And we spent a good portion of the day catching lots of wild brook trout and wild rainbow trout. And it was a good full day of winter's fishing. And we got back to our campsite and we made a fire. We made some food. We hung out. And we hung out till nearly 11, 12 o'clock. And we were sleeping that night. He has a truck camper set up. So we got the truck set up and we kind of got in our sleeping bags and about ready to fall asleep. Mm-hmm. And it was very frigid cold. And all of a sudden, you think you're alone out in the middle of the mountain, dead quiet. You see these lights start coming up through the tree line. Like, what? Do you see that? It keeps getting closer and closer, and there's this noise. I'm like, what the heck is that? And finally, it's this little crappy Honda Civic that somehow made it up this really extreme mountain road and parked right next to us. And we're like, ooh, what's happening here?
Yeah.
And they parked the car.
Don't like that. They park the car, and these neon lights turn on inside. And the whole thing lights up like a disco ball. And, they don't know people are in this truck, let alone staring at them while this is happening. And like, oh, no, this could be bad. And as soon as those neon disco ball lights go on, this loud, crazy music starts up inside the car. Just absolutely insane. Like, what do we do here? And we don't really want to go talk to them because who knows what they're doing in there. And we don't really want them to know we're in here, but at the same time, it'd be nice if they knew people were nearby because maybe they'd leave. So we stuck it out and we tried to sleep. Sure enough, we woke up at 4 a.m.
Those people were still awake in that car, music blaring. All of a sudden, the car was running the whole night. They put it in reverse, drive out, and are gone. And we woke up and tried to fish the next morning, and we're about half alive trying to get through the day in that cold winter mountain. But just a very odd experience for a wintertime trip.
Were you sleeping beside them while the music was going?
Oh yeah. No.
Why don't you just relocate? Or did you have camp set up?
We had camp set up.
Okay, that's why you couldn't just pull out of there. Yeah.
Yeah. That would be a good option. But again, we didn't really want to show ourselves.
Yeah. That's the dumbest thing when people just park right beside you.
Yeah. And who knows what substances and stuff was going on out there, and you just,
Of course not.
How dare I? How dare I assume something was happening? Yeah. Horrible of me. So anyhow, precautions were taken and we survived.
I noticed that all of your winter stories so far that you've shared have to do with other people and experiences with other people, and all of mine have been about my solo trips. It's true. I noticed that. And I'm about to give you another solo trip thing.
Lay it on me.
This one's quick. I decided early on that I was going to, when I got back to this region, I decided I was going to fish all winter. I was going to do this. I had maybe done a winter day here and there, but I decided all winter I'm going to fish no matter what, I had the time and I was going to do it. I remember I had this green Gander Mountain raincoat. You remember that one?
Mm-hmm.
Do you?
Okay. Yes, I do. I remember. I can see a fish picture in my mind with that raincoat.
And it's like a different era for me. Anyway, I remember I had that on, and I didn't really know how to dress like we talked about last week. I seriously didn't. That was all trial and error. And this was some of the error. I went in, and it was very cold. I'm going to say low teens. And I was just underdressed, and I just didn't, it's a good thing I was young because I couldn't, But anyway, I also dropped my reel in the water, and it was cold. I, of course, picked up my reel and my rod and reel, tried to dry it off. 3 or 4 minutes later, it's frozen. I mean, frozen solid. So I went over to the bank and I spent the next, I'm going to say 45 minutes trying to get it, unlocked. And what I eventually did, my dog's there with me and stuff too. We kind of both huddled up against a tree, kind of out of the wind as much as possible. And I had taken that reel off and I put it inside my coat, and then I'm just holding it tight. I didn't have hand warmers or anything like that back then. I wasn't doing that. And I remember even my dog, if I was on the bank, he always wanted to be right next to me. So I felt like the two of us were just building up this body heat. And then eventually I unlocked the reel and then I dried it off as much as I could. I even peeled off most of the fly line, I think almost down to the backing, if I remember right, to try to dry up everything as much as I could. I took the spool off. Once I got it unlocked, I was like, I'm drying this up as best as I could.
Yeah.
And it was still a little bit sticky for the rest of the day. But I bet I lasted another 4 or 5 hours. I remember fishing till dusk. And it was just a very memorable day. And it was so windy. I honestly can't tell you anything about the fishing. I don't remember what the fishing was like. I do remember I caught some fish back then most days, but I don't remember that part.
Yeah. Good for you for sticking that out.
Well, we talked about that. The struggle.
Yeah.
That's what I remember is that challenge and just something like, well, I drove all the way back here. I'm sticking it out. I'm going to figure this out. And you do what you got to do.
That's good.
I'm sure that's one of the days that Dylan, my border collie, had icicles hanging off his fur.
Yeah.
I told you he didn't care. He didn't care. He was so tough. Cool dog. All right, so next week, let's do streamers. Streamers in the wintertime. We'll kind of do the same thing where we'll highlight the differences and the unique things that we do and that we've found that work best in the wintertime. All right, Austin, you want to read us out?
Sounds good. All right, so remember, the Troutbitten Project is a free resource for all anglers. The Troutbitten website hosts over 900 articles with endless stories, commentaries, tactics, tips, and more. Find what you like through the top menu and through the search page. Navigate by way of the categories and the tags too. Be sure to find the Troutbitten YouTube channel, currently featuring the Troutbitten Tips series in collaboration with Wiles Media. These are short, useful, and unique tips for your fly fishing life. Thank you for listening to the Troutbitten Podcast. Please give the show a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and leave a comment, because that really helps. Until next time, friends, fish hard, enjoy the day, and find your life on the water.
Austin Dando.
Yeah.
I should have drank beer.
Probably somewhere in France.
It is. It's fun.
They do make that.
One grind after the other.
I believe you.
It's grind. It's grind.
Don't like that.
You might be really comfortable with a bad rig.
Don't like that.
Yeah, it flies. I still catch all the trout I want to, Austin. Did you know that?
If you really wanted to.
You're not going to get a true dead drift.
No. Fishy. Hey, Slooper.
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 Hey, Slooper.